He came back home to Africa as a billionaire. After years of silence, distance, and unanswered questions, Tunde Adeyemi finally returned to Lagos with wealth, power, and a name that opened doors in every room he entered. But nothing prepared him for what he was about to see that afternoon. A traffic stop, a roadside crowd, a woman under the burning sun holding a tray of fruit on her head. And then, in a single moment, his whole world stood still. Because the woman standing by the roadside was not just any stranger. She was Nkemdilim, the woman he once loved with all his heart, the woman he promised to marry, the woman who sacrificed everything to send him abroad. Now she was standing in worn-out slippers, selling fruit by the roadside. What happened to her after he left? Why did their love story suddenly disappear into silence? And how did the woman who once dreamed of building a life with him end up fighting to survive in traffic? Stay with us, because this story is emotional, painful, and unforgettable. And before we continue, if you enjoy powerful African stories like this, kindly support the channel by liking the video, subscribing, and turning on notifications so you never miss the next story. Now, let us begin. It was a humid afternoon in Lagos when the private jet landed. The airport staff moved quickly and carefully around the runway as Tunde Adeyemi stepped down from the aircraft in a dark, tailored suit. He wore a simple wristwatch that looked expensive without trying too hard. In one hand was his phone. In the other was a small leather bag. Even though he had spent years in Europe building one of the fastest-growing logistics technology companies, there was something about being back home that made him go quiet inside. The air felt familiar. The noise felt familiar. Even the smell of the city carried memories he had buried for too long. His driver greeted him respectfully and opened the back door of the waiting vehicle. "Welcome home, sir." Tunde nodded softly. "Thank you." As the car drove out of the airport and into the city, Tunde sat back and stared through the window. Lagos was still Lagos. Busy, restless, alive. Street traders moved from car to car. Hawkers balanced goods on their heads with the kind of strength only struggle could teach. Okadas cut through traffic like arrows. Billboards flashed over crowded roads. Loud horns rose and fell like music the city never stopped singing. But Tunde's mind was far away. He was not really looking at the traffic. He was looking at the past. Years earlier, before the money, before the suits, before the headlines and business awards, there had only been two young people trying to survive with hope in their hearts. Him and Nkemdilim. The car slowed near a long stretch of traffic close to Victoria Island. Tunde barely noticed at first. He was checking a message from one of his business associates when he heard a woman's voice outside. "Fresh oranges, sweet bananas, pineapple, fresh fruit!" Something about the voice touched a place in him he had not opened in years. He looked up. At first, all he saw was a woman moving carefully between cars with a metal tray balanced on her head. Her clothes were neat but old. Her face looked tired. Her skin was darker from long hours under the sun. Life had clearly not been gentle with her. Then she turned slightly, and Tunde froze. His fingers tightened around his phone. His breathing changed. No. It could not be. He leaned forward. The driver looked back through the rear mirror. "Sir?" Tunde did not answer. The woman came closer to the black SUV, gently knocking on the glass with her knuckles, hoping for a customer. That was when he saw her properly. The eyes, the shape of her face, the small mark near her chin. His chest tightened. Nkemdilim, he whispered. The driver heard him this time. Sir? Wait. His voice had changed. Tunde opened the door and stepped out into the heat. The security man in the front moved quickly, but Tunde raised one hand. It is fine. Nkemdilim turned toward him. At first, she looked only mildly surprised, the way anyone would when a wealthy-looking man suddenly stepped out of a luxury car in traffic. Then her eyes settled on his face. Everything inside her seemed to stop. The tray on her head shook slightly. Her lips parted. Tunde? His name came out of her mouth like something half remembered, half impossible. For a few seconds, neither of them moved. Traffic sounds faded behind them. It was as if Lagos itself had gone quiet just to watch that moment. Tunde took a slow step closer. Nkemdilim. Her eyes filled instantly. The tray slipped from her hands. Oranges rolled across the roadside. Bananas dropped into the dust. People nearby turned to look. Nkemdilim staggered as if her body could no longer carry the weight of that shock. Nkemdilim! Tunde rushed forward just as her knees gave way. He caught her before she hit the ground. Her body felt frighteningly light in his arms. Too light. Too weak. He looked at her face, and panic entered his eyes. Nkemdilim, open your eyes. Nkemdilim! But she did not answer. The driver came running. Sir! Open the car, now! Within seconds, Tunde carried her into the back seat himself. The fruit tray and spilled goods were forgotten. Traffic was forgotten. Meetings were forgotten. Everything else in the world disappeared. All that mattered in that moment was the woman lying unconscious against the leather seat. Take us to the nearest private hospital, Tunde said urgently. The car sped away. Inside the moving vehicle, Tunde held Nkemdilim's hand tightly. His mind was racing. How had life brought her to this point? Why was she selling fruit by the roadside? Why did she look so weak? And why, after all these years, was fate bringing her back into his life like this? At the hospital, nurses rushed out with a stretcher. Tunde followed so closely that one of the attendants had to ask him to step back. Sir, let us do our work. He stopped, but only because he had no choice. Minutes later, Nkemdilim disappeared behind the emergency doors. Tunde stood in the waiting area with both hands on his waist, trying to calm the storm inside him. He had spent years building companies, leading teams, making billion-dollar decisions, and standing on global stages without shaking. But now, standing in a hospital hallway in Lagos, he felt powerless. He sat down, then stood up again, then walked, then stopped. Every step he took pulled another memory out of the past. Many years earlier, he and Nkemdilim had first met after university during a youth entrepreneurship workshop in Surulere. Back then, life was ordinary. No luxury, no promises of wealth, just dreams. Tunde had been brilliant but broke. Nkemdilim had been soft-spoken but strong-minded. She believed in effort. She believed in dignity. She believed that no matter how small a beginning looked, consistency could build a future. They became friends first, then close friends, then something deeper. She was the kind of woman who remembered the small things. If Tunde had no money for lunch, she noticed before he said a word. If he was discouraged, she would not just tell him to be strong. She would sit with him and help him think through a solution. When he finally told her he loved her, it happened in the simplest way possible. No expensive restaurant, no crowd. Just a quiet evening under a weak yellow bulb during a power outage, with both of them sharing roasted corn and bottled water on plastic chairs outside her aunt's compound. I do not have much, he had told her. Nkemdilim smiled. I know. But I want to build a life with you. She looked at him for a long moment. And I want that life with you too. That was how it began. Months passed. Tunde worked odd jobs while applying for scholarships abroad. Deep in his heart, he always believed that if he could just get one real opportunity, he would change his life completely. Then the email came. He had been accepted into a master's program in the Netherlands on a scholarship. For a whole minute, he could not breathe properly after reading it. But there was a problem. The scholarship covered tuition. It did not cover his flight, settling expenses, or the first few months of survival. He was crushed. That same evening, he told Nkemdilim everything. At first, she screamed with joy and hugged him. Then she saw the worry in his eyes. What is wrong? He lowered his face. I do not have the money to go. The room became quiet. He expected her to become discouraged. But instead, Nkemdilim held his hand and asked one question. How much do you need? Tunde looked at her. No, Nkemdilim, it is too much. How much? He told her. She went quiet. Then she nodded slowly. We will find it. Over the next few weeks, Nkemdilim did something he never forgot. She emptied her savings. She sold her jewelry. She even sold 2 gold bangles her late mother had left for her. When Tunde found out, he was devastated. Why would you do that? She smiled through tired eyes. Because I believe in where you are going. Tunde cried that night. Not because he was weak, but because real sacrifice has a way of humbling even the strongest man. Before he left Nigeria, he bought a simple ring. It was not expensive, but it carried his entire heart. At the airport, just before boarding, he slipped it onto Nkemdilim's finger. When I settle down, I will come back for you. She nodded with tears in her eyes. I will wait. And then he left. Back in the present, the hospital doors opened. A doctor in a white coat approached. Are you with the patient? Tunde stepped forward immediately. Yes, how is she? The doctor adjusted his glasses. She fainted from exhaustion and severe weakness. But there is another problem. Tunde's face hardened. What problem? We ran some tests. She has been living with a serious abdominal condition for some time. She has also become dangerously anemic. If care is delayed too long, it could get worse. Tunde's chest tightened. What needs to be done? She needs treatment immediately. There may also be surgery, depending on how she responds after further scans. How soon? The doctor looked directly at him. As soon as possible. Tunde did not hesitate. Do everything. The doctor paused. Sir, there will be costs. I said, do everything. The doctor nodded. Very well. As preparations began, Tunde sat back down in the waiting area. But his mind refused to rest. He remembered his first months abroad. Life there had not been glamorous the way people imagined. It had been cold, lonely, and brutal. He studied during the day, worked nights cleaning office spaces and loading storage crates. He had planned to call Nkemdilim every day, and at first he did. But everything changed after one morning on a crowded train. He was rushing to class, carrying his backpack and phone. Somewhere between the station platform and the university gate, his bag was slashed by a thief. By the time he noticed, his phone, his wallet, and the small notebook where he had written important numbers were gone. He panicked. He tried to recover the phone. Nothing. He went to the police. Nothing. At the time, he had not memorized Nkemdilim's number. He only knew it through his device and messaging apps. His email access was locked behind security steps that took days to recover. By the time he was back online, the Nigerian SIM linked to some of his accounts had been deactivated. He spent weeks trying to reconnect. He called mutual acquaintances whose numbers he could still remember. Most had changed numbers. Some had relocated. A letter he sent through a friend never reached her. Every month that passed made the gap wider. But Tunde never forgot her. He finished his program with distinction. Then he got a junior role at a transport data company. That was where life changed again. He and two colleagues built a software product that helped African businesses track cargo movement, customs delays, and warehouse loss in real time. At first, it was just a side project. Then investors noticed it. Then one investor offered money. Then another offered more. Within 4 years, the company exploded across 3 continents. By the time Tunde turned 34, he was no longer just successful. He was rich beyond anything the younger version of him had ever imagined. But with every achievement, one regret remained untouched. He had still not found Nkemdilim. He came back to Nigeria not only to expand his business. He came back to search. And now, somehow, he had found her, in the most painful way possible. Later that evening, the doctor returned with an update. "She is awake." Tunde stood immediately. "Can I see her?" "Yes, but please do not stress her." He followed the doctor into the ward. Nkemdilim lay on the hospital bed, looking pale and weak. Without the roadside heat and movement around her, her exhaustion showed even more clearly. Her cheeks were thinner than he remembered. Her eyes looked older. Life had marked her in quiet, cruel ways. When she saw him enter, she became still. For a long moment, she simply stared. Then tears gathered slowly in her eyes. "Tunde?" He moved closer and sat by the bed. "Yes, it is me." She kept looking at him as if she feared he would disappear if she blinked. "You are really here." "I am here." Nkemdilim swallowed hard. For a moment, neither of them knew what to say. Years of silence stood between them like a wall made of pain, misunderstanding, and time. Finally, Tunde spoke softly. "The doctor said you have been sick." Nkemdilim looked away. "It is not new." "You knew?" She nodded. "For some time." "Why did you keep working like that on the roadside?" A weak smile touched her lips. "Because sickness does not stop hunger." His eyes filled with pain. "And because treatment is expensive," she added. Tunde looked down for a moment, fighting emotion. Then he raised his eyes again. "You will not go back there." Nkemdilim looked at him quietly. "Tunde, you will not go back there," he repeated. "Not while I am here." Something in his voice made her eyes shake with emotion. She closed them briefly as tears escaped. He wanted to ask everything right then. Why she vanished. Why she was in that condition. Why life had crushed her so badly. But she looked too weak. So instead, he adjusted the blanket over her carefully and said, "Rest first. We will talk later." Outside the ward, Tunde handled all the payments himself. Tests, scans, medication, admission, private monitoring. He approved everything immediately.
The next day, the doctors confirmed she would need a procedure, followed by a few days of recovery. Tunde remained at the hospital through it all. He answered calls from investors in the corridor. He signed contracts from the waiting room. He postponed high-level meetings without apology. When people close to him asked why he was suddenly unreachable, he gave only one answer: "I am where I need to be." The surgery was successful. The doctor reassured him that Nkemdilim had come in just in time. If she had delayed much longer, her body would have become too weak. Tunde breathed out slowly and thanked God in silence. For 4 days, Nkemdilim remained in the hospital. And during those same 4 days, Tunde quietly put other things in order. A luxury townhouse he had been considering in Lekki was purchased outright. A house help and private nurse were arranged. A nutritionist was consulted. And before Nkemdilim was discharged, Tunde had already rebuilt a safe space around her life. On the morning she was cleared to leave, he entered her ward with calm eyes. "You are going home today." Nkemdilim looked at him carefully. "Home?" He gave a faint smile. "Yes, to rest."
When they stepped outside the hospital and she saw the black luxury SUV waiting, she paused. Then she looked at him. He opened the door for her gently. Inside the car, silence followed them for a while. The city moved past. Nkemdilim kept stealing small glances at him. She had 100 questions. So did he. Finally, she asked, "Where are you taking me?" "To my place." She said nothing after that. But when the car entered one of the most expensive estates in Lekki, her face changed. The houses were massive. The streets were spotless. Security gates stood tall and polished. She turned toward him slowly. "This is your place?" Tunde kept his eyes ahead. "Yes." She looked out of the window again, trying to understand the scale of the life he now lived. When the gates opened and the car entered a beautiful compound with a fountain and trimmed hedges, Nkemdilim's breathing changed. Tunde stepped out first, walked around the car, and opened her door carefully. "Easy." He supported her as they entered the house. Inside, everything was elegant. Soft lighting, large glass windows, quiet luxury. Nothing too loud, but everything expensive. Nkemdilim stood still in the living room. For a few seconds, she forgot her weakness. "This is real?" Tunde looked at her. "Yes." He led her upstairs to a bright bedroom prepared for her comfort. "This room is yours for now. Rest. Heal. Regain your strength." Nkemdilim looked at him. "And after that?" Tunde held her gaze. "After that, we talk." Later that evening, after she had bathed, eaten a little, and taken her medication, Tunde returned to the room. He found her sitting by the window in a robe, staring at the city lights. He placed a tray of tea on the side table and sat opposite her. For a few moments, neither of them spoke. Then, Nkemdilim finally said it. "Tell me why you disappeared." Tunde lowered his eyes briefly. There was no anger in her tone. That made it even harder. He took a deep breath, and he told her everything. The theft, the lost phone, the missing contacts, the failed attempts to trace her, the friend who went looking for her old address, only to find that she no longer lived there. The years of searching through mutual circles with no success. The work, the tech startup, the international expansion, the money, the return to Nigeria, and the truth that through all of it, she never left his heart. When he finished, the room stayed quiet. Nkemdilim looked at him for a long time. Then she asked softly, "You truly tried to find me?" Tunde's eyes did not move from hers. "I never stopped." Tears gathered in her eyes, but she blinked them back. Then Tunde leaned slightly forward. "Now tell me about you." Nkemdilim looked down at her hands. For a few moments, she said nothing. Then she began. "At first, everything was fine after you left. We spoke often. I waited. I counted days. I told myself the distance would pass." Her fingers tightened together. "Then, after some weeks, I could not reach you again." She said she kept trying his number every day. At first, she thought maybe his classes were too demanding. Then maybe his network was poor. Then maybe he had changed accommodation. But as weeks turned into months, fear entered her heart. She visited the apartment Tunde had lived in before leaving, hoping someone might know something. Nothing. She reached out to friends. No one had answers. Then another problem came. The company where she worked downsized after a major financial crash. Her department was cut. She received a small severance package, but it was not enough to carry her for long. At that same time, her father fell ill in the village. There was no one else to help. She began sending money home. The rent on her apartment became impossible. She moved to a smaller place. Then smaller again. Then one day, her landlord threw her things outside after months of delay. Tunde listened without interrupting. Nkemdilim continued. She took temporary jobs where she could. Shop assistant, reception work, stock counting, laundry help. None lasted. Then she began feeling severe pain and weakness in her body. A hospital eventually told her she had a serious condition requiring treatment and likely surgery. She laughed bitterly when she remembered it. "I could barely afford food. Then they told me I needed surgery." Tunde's jaw tightened. "So I did what I could. I started selling fruit in traffic. Some days I sold enough to eat. Some days I did not. I kept hoping I would save enough for treatment." She paused. "But the body has limits." Her eyes became distant. "The day you saw me, I had not eaten properly since the previous night." Silence filled the room. Tunde's face hardened with pain and regret. After a while, he asked, "Why did you never marry?" Nkemdilim looked at him and gave a tired smile. "Because I did not know how to give my heart to someone else." That answer broke something inside him. He looked away and pressed his lips together. After that night, a quiet healing began between them. Day by day, Nkemdilim regained strength. Her cheeks slowly returned. Her laughter started coming back in small pieces. Sometimes Tunde would work from home just to stay nearby. Sometimes they sat in silence, without discomfort, as if both were learning how to exist in the same space again after years of loss. Other times, they talked for hours about everything life had done to them. One afternoon, as they sat together in the garden, Tunde handed her a small envelope. She opened it and found papers inside. "What is this?" "Your mother's old house in the village," he said calmly. "I had it renovated." Nkemdilim stared at him in shock. "What?" "I also arranged proper treatment follow-up for your father." Her eyes filled. "Tunde, why are you doing all this?" He looked at her steadily. "Because when I had nothing, you stood beside me. What kind of man would I be if I found you like this and looked away?" Weeks later, when Nkemdilim had fully recovered, Tunde began taking her out again. Not to show off wealth, not to impress her, but to help her remember joy. He took her to the beach at sunset, to bookstores she used to love, to art spaces and quiet restaurants. He bought her beautiful clothes, but always gently, never in a way that made her feel like a project. Still, one thing mattered more to Nkemdilim than gifts: dignity. She did not want a life where she simply received. She wanted to build. One evening, while they sat in the living room, she turned to him seriously. "There is something I have been thinking about." Tunde muted the television. "I am listening." Nkemdilim sat up straighter. "You have done so much for me. But I do not want to just sit in this beautiful house and exist. I want to work. I want to build something of my own." Tunde watched her with quiet admiration. "What do you want to build?" She took a breath. "I spent months on the roadside. I learned something there. Farmers lose money. Street sellers suffer. Fruit spoils too quickly. There is no proper chain for small traders. What if I build a business that buys from women sellers and local farmers, preserves produce, and supplies clean packaged fruit and juice to offices, supermarkets, and schools? We could start small. Dried fruit, fresh cut packs, juice blends. Later we can expand. But this time, I want to build something that lifts other women too." For a few seconds, Tunde said nothing. Then a proud smile appeared on his face. "That," he said softly, "is the Nkemdilim I remember." Her eyes searched his. "You think it is a good idea?" He laughed quietly. "I think it is an excellent idea." She smiled for the first time in a way that reached her whole face. In the months that followed, they worked together. Tunde connected her with consultants, but he did not take over. He let her lead. Nkemdilim chose the business name herself. She met suppliers, visited local farms, spoke with women traders, built systems, learned packaging standards, and soon, what began as pain by the roadside transformed into a promising business with purpose. The first time she saw her brand stocked in a premium supermarket in Lagos, she stood silently in the aisle and cried. Not because of the shelves, not because of the lighting, but because she remembered the heat of traffic and the weight of fruit on her head. She remembered the shame, the exhaustion, the hunger. And now she was standing there, restored. Tunde stood beside her without speaking. He knew some victories were too deep for words. Their love also deepened, not in the reckless way of youth, but in the mature, tested way only pain can teach. One night, after a long day, they sat together on the rooftop terrace of the house. The city lights stretched far into the darkness. A soft breeze moved through the air. Nkemdilim rested her head lightly on his shoulder. "Tunde?" "Yes?" "If that day had not happened in traffic, do you think we would still have found each other?" He was quiet for a while before answering. "Yes." She lifted her head. "How are you so sure?" He turned and looked at her. "Because some people are not accidents." Her eyes softened. He continued, "You were part of my prayer for too many years. God would not bring me back home just to miss you again." Tears filled her eyes. But this time, they were not tears of pain. They were the tears of someone finally arriving at peace. A few weeks later, Tunde told her he needed her downstairs in the garden for something important. She came down wearing a simple, elegant dress, expecting perhaps a small dinner or business conversation. But as soon as she stepped outside, she froze. The garden had been lit with warm, hanging lights. Flowers lined the walkway. A violinist played softly in the corner. At the center stood Tunde in a deep navy suit, and in his hand was a small ring box. Nkemdilim covered her mouth immediately. "Tunde." He walked toward her slowly. When he reached her, he looked at her with the kind of honesty that only years of love and loss could produce. "Years ago, I asked you to marry me with a cheap ring and an empty pocket." Nkemdilim's tears began to fall. He continued, "You said yes to the man I was before the world saw any value in me." His voice grew deeper with emotion. "You believed in me when all I had were dreams, fear, and determination." Then he knelt on one knee. "This time, I am not asking you as a struggling young man who hopes for a future." He opened the ring box. "I am asking you as a man who knows exactly who he wants beside him for the rest of his life." Nkemdilim was already crying openly now. "Tunde." He looked up at her. "Nkemdilim Okafor, will you marry me again? Not because of the years we lost, but because of the life we still deserve to build together." She nodded before words came. "Yes." Then again, stronger. "Yes, I will." Tunde smiled, slid the ring onto her finger, and stood up. Nkemdilim threw her arms around him and held him tightly. For a long moment, they stayed like that under the garden lights, holding each other as if the whole journey of their lives had led back to this exact place. Later that night, after the celebration meal, Tunde handed her another envelope. She laughed through tears. "What is this one again?" "Open it." Inside were 2 tickets. Nkemdilim looked up in surprise. "Cape Town?" Tunde smiled. A short vacation before wedding planning turned serious. She laughed and hit his shoulder lightly. "You already planned all this?" "I have been waiting a very long time." She shook her head with emotion and hugged him again. Months later, their wedding took place in Lagos. It was beautiful, elegant, full of joy. But what moved people most was not the decoration, the outfits, or the luxury. It was the way they looked at each other. Like 2 people who had seen the worst of life and still found their way back to love. By then, Nkemdilim's business had begun employing several women who had once sold by the roadside, just as she had. Tunde expanded his African operations and quietly funded a health support foundation for low-income women needing critical treatment. Together, they built more than romance. They built restoration. And in the quiet moments of their new life, both of them understood something deeply. Sometimes life separates people. Sometimes it wounds them. Sometimes it delays what the heart feels should happen immediately. But not every delay is destruction. Some delays are preparation. Some losses clear the road for deeper understanding. And sometimes, when love is genuine, tested, and patient, it finds its way back home. Tunde did not just return to Africa as a billionaire. He returned to recover the part of his heart that money could never replace. And Nkemdilim did not just leave the roadside. She rose from pain into purpose. Their story reminds us that true love is not proven by sweet words alone. It is proven by sacrifice, by loyalty, by who still remembers your value when life has stripped everything else away. Now we would love to hear from you. What do you think about Tunde and Nkemdilim's story? Do you believe real love can survive silence, hardship, and time? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if this story touched your heart in any way, do not forget to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe for more powerful African stories. Thank you so much for watching.